Okay, Year 8, in today's lesson we are looking at tropical rainforests. So we're still looking at topic 3, looking at Africa, and we're coming towards the end of this topic. So in today's lesson we're going to look at tropical rainforests. In your next lesson you're going to look at deserts. And then in the following lesson, you're going to look at the population of Africa and different countries. And then we're going to be moving on to our fourth topic. So we're coming towards the end of this. And the next few lessons are very exciting. So what are we going to be doing in today's lesson? Well, we're going to be describing the distribution of tropical rainforests around the world. We're going to be describing the features of different tropical rainforests and the different layers that tropical rainforests are made up of. And then we're going to be describing the characteristics of tropical rainforests. So looking at the plants and animals within them and explaining how they have adapted. So how they have changed their way of life and their features to survive in this environment. So make sure, please, that when you're completing this the work for today's lesson, you have open either the PDF or the Word document that I have put together. You might choose to have them open side by side, so when you're working through the activities, you can use the video as a prompt to help you. So let's move on to task 1. Task 1 then, there are 7 facts about tropical rainforests. So all I would like you to do for task 1 is to read through these different facts and write down 3 that you have found the most interesting about tropical rainforests, or 3 that you didn't know about. So if you didn't know that more than 70% of the plants that are used to treat cancer are found in tropical rainforests, then you would write down that one. So if you've printed off the PDF or you're working on the Word document, you can type or you can write these down on lined paper. So once you've done that, let's move on to task 2. Task 2 then, we need to describe the distribution of tropical rainforests. So we're saying where they are. And when we're doing this, we should try to use T. So the T is the trend, the E is the evidence, and the A is the anomaly if there is one. So you don't always have to talk about an anomaly if you don't think there is one. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to add to my map the equator line. And you will notice straight away, if we were giving a trend or a pattern, that all of the tropical rainforests seem to be along the equator. So I would say something, obviously you're going to write in full sentences, they're found along the equator, so there seems to be a pattern. Now we need to back this up with evidence. So we need to talk about the names of continents, oceans, compass directions, whether they're found in the Tropic of Cancer or Capricorn, or whether they're found in the Northern Hemisphere or the Southern Hemisphere. So generally we need to talk about these 3 continents that they're mostly found on. So we might want to make reference to the fact they're found in South America, Africa, and Asia, but then there's also a little bit in Oceania. So you talk about those, and then you'd say where they are within these continents. So within South America, they're found mostly in the north of South America, whereas in Africa, they're found in Central Africa and also along mostly the western coast of Africa. When we're talking about Asia, we're saying that they're mostly found in southern Asia. And you might want to mention specific locations such as Borneo, which is here. And then when we're talking about Oceania, we're saying it's mostly found in eastern Oceania. You might want to talk about the lines of latitude and longitude because you can actually see these on your map. So you could refer to the fact that they're mostly found within the tropics of Cancer and Capricorn. So that's another thing that you could mention. So within tropics of Cancer and Capricorn. And if we think back to before half term when we were looking at the different types of pressure, so high and low pressure, if we think about it, it makes sense that we find tropical rainforests along the equator because the equator is an area of low pressure. So that means that the sun heats the ground, which is where we find the sun most concentrated along the equator. So it heats the ground, then that hot air rises, it cools and condenses, it makes clouds, and then it rains. So it's very obvious why we have tropical rainforests, which are generally very hot and very wet, found along the equator. So once you've completed task 2, let's move on to task 3. Task 3 then is looking at the structure and the layer of tropical rainforests. Now there are 4 layers found in tropical rainforests. So we have the shrub layer, which is at the very bottom of tropical rainforests, and they get roughly 25% of the sunlight. So these are what these little icons are showing you. The undercanopy then is the second layer, and that gets roughly 50% of the Earth's sunlight. The next layer is the canopy layer, which gets 75% of the sunlight, and then the emergent layer are these ones that rise through. So they're competing to try and get the most sunlight, and they get 100%. So what I would like you to do for task 3 is to read through the descriptions and decide which layer you think that they are describing. So if you're working on a Word document or a PDF, you can either match them up or highlight them. Or if you're working on paper, I would maybe draw this diagram on the right and then just write a summary next to each layer about the description. And then once you've done that, if you pause here until you've completed this, because then the next thing that's going to come up are the answers. So make sure you green penned your work before you move on. And now we're going to look more specifically about the different animals and plants within the tropical rainforest. So green pen your work, check it's correct, and then we're going to move on to our final task, which is task 4. So task 4 then, we're looking at the animals and plants within the tropical rainforests. So what I would like you to do is on your PDF or your Word document, you will see that there are 4 images and they have lots of questions around them. And we're going to go through these questions now, but it might be worth you annotating your pictures at the same time. So by the end of task 4, you will have described the physical features that you can see in tropical rainforests, you will have answered the questions around the photographs, and you will have given reasons, when appropriate, as to how plants and animals have adapted. So adapted is a key word, and it's written down on the Word document and the PDF that you're working on. So to adapt is to change something to adjust their environment. So it might be that if this was an environment that got lots of rainfall, you might need to be able to swim. If it's an environment that doesn't get a lot of rainfall, you might want to be able to hold on to water for prolonged periods of time. So it's what animals and plants do to change the way they live in order to survive. So let's look at this first image on the board. Well, what do the trees look like? To me, they are very luscious and green. So they look like they are evergreen, so they are green all year round. And that will be because of the climate, so the fact that it's hot and wet all year. So this kind of links into why the vegetation is this way. Because it's hot and wet all year, it's able to photosynthesize, and it's thus able to grow all year round, and that makes it completely evergreen. Okay. What do you notice about the rocks? So if we look at the rocks, we can see that they're covered in lots of moss and algae, and that is because it's very damp and dark here. So we are looking at the the shrub layer of the tropical rainforests. So it's very clear that they only get 25% of the Earth's sunlight, which means it's very dark and it's very damp, because when it rains, all of that rain will trickle down into the shrub layer, which means that the types of vegetation here are going to be mostly quite mossy. We'll get lots of fungi and mushrooms, and you can see that on the plants. Okay then, so let's move on to the next picture once you've annotated this one. Now this is showing us in the same layer, so we're still looking at the shrub layer. Change the colour on my pen. So that still gets 25% of sunlight. And you can see that within the middle of this picture, we have this very intensely large and thick looking tree. Now, these are the trees that are most common in tropical rainforests. And we're not really focusing on the trunk, but we're looking at these roots. And these roots are known as buttress roots. And I've given a definition for a buttress root at the base or the bottom of this slide. So buttress roots are very important because they are able to support the trees, which means that they can grow extremely high. So these trees will make their way all the way up to the emergent layer. So tens of meters away from the ground, they're able to rise and compete for sunlight. And the reason that they're able to do it is because of these buttress roots. So buttress roots have allowed plants to adapt and change so that they can grow higher and therefore get more sunlight. Now, if you look at other things, you can see that the soil is quite shallow. So it's helped by the fact that the roots are very thick and very big on buttress roots, but then also it's made worse by the fact that the soil levels in tropical rainforests is very shallow. So they're not very deep. And that is because it rains so much in tropical rainforests, all of this, I'm just going to draw on some raindrops. I should have really drawn them in blue. All of this soil is then washed away. And that's made worse when we cut down the trees, because the roots don't have anything to hold the soil together with because they've been cut down, and then the soil washes away, which means the soil in the tropical rainforest is very thin. Now, other things we could mention here is the amount of sunlight. So we can see some sunlight coming in from the left of this image here, but it's not a lot because you can see there's a layer of plants which are kind of stopping the sunlight from coming in. So you might want to think about, it might be quite dark in these areas, which will be good for predators if they're trying to hide from their prey. The next image then is looking at another type of plant that has adapted to live in the tropical rainforest. So these little plants that we can see here, they kind of look a bit like this. These are called epiphytes, and I've given you a definition at the bottom. So epiphytes are plants which live on the branches of trees high in the canopy layer. So the canopy layer is, so if I just draw the different layers on, we've got the shrub layer at the bottom, then the under canopy, then the canopy, and then the emergent layer. So the canopy layer gets roughly 75% of the sunlight. So the plants that live here are there for a reason. It's because they want the sunlight. They need the sunlight. And that is because they get all of their nutrients. So all of the things that help them grow and survive is from the air and the water and the sun, and not from the soil. So epiphytes have adapted to being so high up and away from the soil by not relying on it anymore. And there's some other things that we can see. We've got some little animals here. So the animals might be living in this environment because of the plants and the fruit that is on offer in the canopy layer. And then this is the final photograph. So this is looking at the different animals that live in the tropical rainforest and how they can survive. So in the top left-hand corner, we can see a sloth. Now, a sloth is important because they have got very thick nails that allow them to clutch and grab on to trees. They're also able to camouflage, so they can hide from predators. In addition, we have things like leopards. So leopards are very fast moving, which means that they are able to hunt for their prey very, very quickly. And then we have other animals that aren't necessarily on this photograph, but they are important. So we have things like spider monkeys, and spider monkeys are important because they have very long and strong limbs, so long and strong arms and legs, which help them to climb and swing through the tropical rainforest. So here are some ways that animals have adapted to try and survive in the tropical rainforest. And you might want to do some research about orangutans and why they are vulnerable. Or you could think back to when we did resources, so this was the first topic of Year 8, and think about what we are doing to the rainforests, which is making orangutans vulnerable. So once you've completed all the activities tests 1 to 4, you need to submit all of your work, please, on the assignment, which is with today's work. And if you have any questions, please send me a message on It's Learning.